Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and spending this hour knowing about how to differentiate for your ELLs. I hope you get a lot of good information to support your ELLs from this webinar. It's titled 5 Surprising Secrets to Differentiate ELL Instruction Like a Pro. And I'm calling them secrets because a lot of people don't know about them. And I've noticed that some teachers kind of forget about them. Hold on, someone just came in, so. Yeah, and so this is number 4 out of a series of 6 webinars. And I hope that you're saving the date for the next one. What we're doing today is laying the ground for the next webinar on co-planning. So if you can make it, please come to next week's webinar as well. So all these pieces will fit together. And the last one in the series is on sustaining a PLC for ELLs. If your school is up to that point, then it'd be worthwhile for you to join and find out how that works. In the chat, I dropped the link for the Google form. It helps you reflect and consolidate your thinking about the 5 steps that we're going through. And once you submit, I'll send you the slide deck. And in the slide deck, you'll have links and everything. So you'll be sure to send that in. All right, I'd like to thank Nice TESOL for giving me this platform to help teachers like you in differentiating instruction for ELLs so that they can be supported in your classroom. Those of you who don't know me, I'm an ELL coordinator at a middle school in Harlem. I like to do a lot of hands-on PBL type of activities for ELLs. I do a lot of co-planning and coaching for teachers, especially in content areas, to adapt ELL strategies into their classroom. Last year I did this workshop for teachers in STEM in Hanoi, which was really good. And I'm also a member of the bilingual special interest group in Nice TESOL. I was in Mexico for 4 months doing a project with this school on indigenous digital storytelling. And what I like to do this year and for a couple more years is collaborate with teachers to improve what they're doing in our profession in order to support ELLs. If you know NYC Men Teach, they're a really good organization to know more about teaching in your craft. Now, the first poll that we have in your Google form is just a simple question. As a teacher of ELLs or an ELL teacher, how would you answer this question? What are language objectives or what are language targets? I'll give you like 10 more seconds. That's really easy answer. All right. Well, right off the bat, I'll tell you what the 5 secrets are. The first is analyzing the RLab modalities, meaning speaking, writing, reading, and listening. The second is to refer to language acquisition progression charts. The third is to teach language demand, but not the grammar. The 4 is combine standards with the language objectives into one learning target. And the 5th one is strategize adaptation of your teaching material. So you have it all there. Our goals today are to reflect on the 5 steps or the 5 secrets and answering these questions. How do I prioritize after analyzing modalities? The second is, what do I like about language acquisition progressions? The third is, which questions do I use to ascertain language demand? The fourth is, how do I combine content standards with language targets? And the fifth is, how can I adapt my content materials? So like I said, today is very much focused on the first 4, and the fifth we'll just hint on as it lays the foundation for the next webinar coming up. Okay? So with those in mind, let's dive into the first one. Analyzing the RLab modalities. Last week we looked at the trajectory of an L according to the NICESLAT. Now we're going into more of an analysis of the modalities that make up that score. Teachers in the New York City area would know about the RLab. If you don't know about the RLab, then you should get one from your administrator at your school. Typically in the main office, they have access to the ATS system. Those of you who are not part of the New York City teaching department, then there's other ways you can assess your students using other forms of analyses that look at the speaking ability, reading, writing, and listening. All right, so once you have the digital RLab, you need the unofficial cutoff list for the entering, emerging, transitioning, and expanding groups, which I'm going to show you. And I made these short videos showing you how to take your digital RLab and configure it so you can analyze them better. So let's try to see if these will work. You should be able to hear it. Hello, this is the second part of the analyzing the RLAT for the progress of ELLs. In this video, I'm going to show you how to look at the 4 modalities in the RLAT to set the foundation for differentiated lesson plans and co-planning. The progress patterns are important if you want to create differentiated language objectives in your learning targets in the subjects you teach. Once you analyze the progress of the NICESLAT, that was the first video, you can dive in and parse out the 4 modalities by analyzing them. You get more information this way. Now, if you teach outside of New York City, you don't have access to the RLAT. An alternative is to assess ELLs in listening, speaking, reading, and writing using another form of assessment, for example, the WIDA. What I'm going to show you now is step 1. You just have to add columns on your RLAT analysis next to each modality. For example, here, this is listening, so you just add a column. This is speaking, add a column. This is reading, add a column. And this is writing, add a column there. All right, it looks very simple. I just added columns on an Excel spreadsheet. Some people don't know how to do that. Now it gets more interesting. For the second step, you're going to need a document that gives you the language proficiency on the NICESLAT. I happen to have this old one from 2018. Notice it's the unofficial cutoffs per modality. Nothing's official here, but it's something that I like to do when I analyze. For example, I have a class of 6th graders, so they took the NICESLAT as a 5th grader. That means we use this attachment D for the ROS to scale score conversion chart. I'm going to show you how to do this step by step. Now, the first score is the listening score. The ROS score is 23, so we go over here, listening score 23, and that's a commanding. So we put commanding here. And for the speaking, the student scored a 20. The speaking is here, 20, that's commanding. Next is reading, 16. That is a transitioning level. And writing is a 5. So go to writing, 5, That's an emerging level, almost a transitioning level. Okay, you can see right off the bat, these scores, commanding, transitioning, and emerging, all are scaled to get a score of expanding as a final decision for this L. All right, so you can see that using the unofficial cutoffs, you have more of a deeper knowledge of the L here. It shows that the decision averaged out to be expanding, but that's kind of like not accurate because it's an average. These scores are an average of listening and speaking, which are high, but reading and writing are low. So let's go back to step number 3. This is the next step. Step 3 is a little bit more labor intensive. Once you've added the columns, you need to cross-reference the raw scores and put them all in. Once you've done that, like I did here, for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, you take each child and see where the challenges are. For example, this one, he scores a expanding, but really that's a average of the aggregate modality scores. Listening, commanding, speaking, commanding. So this student listens well and speaks well, but reading and writing are very low. They average out then to a higher score, the middle score of commanding and the lower scores of transitioning and emerging. I will flag those by giving them a different color. Now this one, he just took the entrance exam, and that's why there's no scores here, but you know that he's an entering. And this one, emerging, entering, is the same case. So I just make those all the same. Here we have a case of a long-term L. I flagged it red. And the score for the nicest average is a transitioning. Transitioning listening, commanding speaking, so he speaks well or she speaks well. And again, emerging in the reading and writing. So flag those. Once you've got all of these done, then take some notes to analyze. This helps you when you prioritize what you want to emphasize in terms of lesson plans and language targets. So reading is transitioning and writing is emerging. I would put W, writing, and reading in this order so you can prioritize writing before reading. And it's just assume that the speaking and listening are high enough. And anyway, you can just cross-reference. Here, it's across the board entering, same as this one. And long-term L, emphasis on reading and writing. Okay? After you get all of these done, you'll have a clearer picture on what you can recommend for learning targets. All right, so you can see that the order of importance for this type of student is in your notes here. So you can quickly reference which is the priority, whether it be reading and writing, listening or speaking. What you'll find is reading and writing are the most challenging, as I would say. So let's go on to the next one, interpreting some of the patterns here. Before you do step 4, this is what your grid should look like. You can see that all the L's have been labeled with priority 1 and 2, maybe 3 and 4, depending on the L, on what they should emphasize. There are a couple here that I wanted to draw your attention to that's kind of off the regular pattern. For example, here, Carlin, she scores transitioning, which is middle level, for listening, reading, and writing, but she has apparently some issues with the speaking section. She got a 0. It could be that she didn't take it that day, or there was no opportunity to make up, so she just got a 0. I would check in with her, but then for the purpose of this analysis, we can just put a speaking signal here. And the rest seem to be pretty much following the same pattern. I put 1 here because this student is 1 point away or 1 question away on the nicest lab. to be in the next level. That's why the emphasis here is on reading. You can see most students have issues reading and writing. There are many more than usual here in my list this year, needing a little bit more reinforcement and listening. So that's why they are tagged. Okay, and of course there will be some who need some speaking help, and those are tagged as well. This should all give you an even sharper eye on the landscape of your class. Before you do step 4. All right, so when you get the links to these videos, you can look at them a little bit more closely. But that was just a bird's eye view of how you interpret the modalities. You can see that the emphasis on reading and writing is strong, and I know that some of you who have experience working with ELLs, that reading and writing are typically very low, even though they speak fluently. Reading and writing typically are what we stress. What's surprising me sometimes in students is that their listening comprehension is also low, and that makes sense because you can't really speak unless you know what a word sounds like. So there's a connection there. And of course, if you can't understand anything, it's really hard for you to read, and it's also very hard for you to produce that word in writing. So here again, it shows where you should be emphasizing. So I hope that's kind of clear for this part of the presentation. Now, the reading and writing is an issue because, as you know, 21st century success requires schools to identify ELLs, measure what they know, and teach them effectively. And that's because this thing that we call academic success for all students really depends on how well you read. And how well you read depends on how rich the words you're exposed to are and your knowledge about them. And that's all affected by the explicit language instruction you get at school. I like this excerpt from Andrew B. Miller, all the way back from 2003. He says, in the 4th grade, an alarming number of students' reading comprehension starts a drastic decline and rarely recovers. Delays in oral language come to be reflected in low reading comprehension that lead to low levels of academic success. So if we are to increase a child's ability to profit from education, we'll have to enrich their oral language during the early years of school. So again, it emphasizes the listening in order for you to speak, in order for you to be a better reader, and of course, producer in writing. Schools can do more to foster this language development, even for ELLs and those who are less advantaged, according to him. Okay, I lost my cursor, so I have to jump out and let this person in. All right, but the thing is, the NICES lab versus the state exam, they're very different. The NICES lab measures basic proficiency, while the ELA exam measures your academic achievement. So if we're teaching ELLs very basic things, like book and chair, that's okay. But even at 7th grade, even at beginning level, 7th grade beginning level, you can teach them concepts that are 7th grade level to be more complex in their academic learning of the language. The ELL profile typically, much to the, well, people think that ELLs come from different countries. Many do, but many are born in the United States. And they are very fluent in their oral language, but they lag in this academic language of proficiency. So that's, all of this underlines the need to teach direct academic language. And so what happens? They become long-term ELLs. Long-term ELL is an L that stays in the program for more than 7 years. And once they get to high school and they haven't passed an ISISLAT, it's proven that they tend to drop out at a higher rate. And that's not good for anybody, right? Also, this gap between what they know academically and what they need to know is not really looked at much. So that needs to be changed. And this explicit instruction on how to use vocabulary, learning new words, is rarely provided in classrooms. That's why you're here now, learning how to do that. Apart from being explicit and sequenced, instruction needs to be linked to every day of a child in order to make it stick in their head. Everyday words can be connected, or the everyday life can be connected to the academic words. Once you have their task in mind, then you need to map backwards in order for them to, in order for you to be able to have a better class, and build in oral and written practice for them to use those words. It's not enough to listen to words, but you also have to produce them. And that should happen daily. So let's look at secret number 1 in your reflection. How do you prioritize after analyzing the modalities? I said a lot of stuff, but think back to when we were using these here. How would you prioritize those letters, whether it be writing or speaking? I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Refer to language acquisition progression charts. Once you have their levels, you have these charts. Now, you can think about language acquisition as a process. You know, if you've ever learned another language, you have to start with the basic stuff. Same with students who are learning English, very basic. So what you need are progression charts. There are many out there. These are links to the WIDA chart, the Engage New York, which is based on WIDA. The Collier's is one I particularly like. TESOL has their own. And Susannah Dutro's ELD matrix is also good, which I'll show you too. This is Collier's. You can see that pre-production phase between 0 to 6 months in US schools, students are able to observe things, normally noun-related and verb-related words that they can say, they can listen to you and say back. As they get to the 6-month and 1-year time in the United States, they come out of that silent period and are able to understand 1 or 2 step commands, for example, or they can name things, recall things, and draw things from what you say verbally. Some of the things I listed on the right side, once you have them, once you're thinking of ways or scenarios to teach, put them in scenarios that they understand, like school, like classes, ask them about their peers or basketball. Family is also a scenario that they know, and eating, everyone likes pizza and ice cream, right? So if you can put the terms in these types of scenarios, they become more familiar and easier to understand. Avoid scenarios where you know like a 6th grader or 7th grader wouldn't be, or even like a 10th grader. In the bank, real estate, investing, unless you're really going to teach those things. I've seen these scenarios in math classes. I had to ask the teachers, like, do the students really know this is the language that goes to like using a bank? They'd have to switch that lesson into more of like a school setting. That's kind of like a tangent. And this is Susannah's matrix. So she has early intermediate. It matches the one previous. They learn to understand and produce observable actions and descriptions, but they're pretty much in the present tense. As you go up the scale to intermediate, early, advanced, you can go into more of the past and the present perfect, past perfect, all the way to the passive voice, which I'm going to allude to after. But you can see the continuum of the language being more and more complex. I'll show you how to look at this to simplify the language, but not stray from what you're doing in content. One model of many models you can use is a focused approach. This is Susannah Dutro's. I just found this and I think it works well, but it matches many of the approaches that I've studied and also deployed in different years. So what you need are the teaching blueprints, working backwards from the output that you're demanding, and also like a planning system. So most of these models for teaching follow this thing. You have to have like a roadmap. You have to think of whatever the output is and go backwards and have a planning system. So the first is the blueprint. It needs to be purposeful and targeted. Well, if you're developing language, then you should put it in terms of the language proficiency. When you see 4 levels, I usually just break them down to 2. So you have entering and emerging, which is pretty much the same, and transitioning and expanding, which are pretty much the same. All right, so instead of looking at 4 different plannings, you can create 2. And the explicit language instruction, stay with your grade level and make sure that you're focused on the function that the content demands. So for example, these are common functions in academic texts. We've seen cause and effect, compare and contrast, explaining, sequencing. You have to go a step further and think that the ELLs need to say these things while participating in the classroom. So you have to give them the prompts to be able to participate well in the classroom in order to have them say something that's related to cause and effect. Okay, so there's different levels for the ELLs as they enter your classroom that you need to be aware of. So this is a blueprint from Dutro's. You might have seen it before, but you can see that the content language skills focus on function, and the explicit language for content is across the board, not only in math, but also in art and PE and science. You use your content to plan backwards and also think of the comprehensibility of the output that your students are expected to produce. And you have to teach them those things. So let's see how it's done. Working backwards, you take the function and you look at the grammatical forms and sentence structures that you need for them to produce, okay? And then you provide for them a level of practice, not only orally, but also written to develop that fluency. So it's pretty much like step by step. You go by function, which comes from your standard. You teach them the form, the language that they have to know, like the vocabulary and sentence structure, focusing on maybe 1, maybe 2 a day, and then give them that opportunity to practice that fluency. Pair share, prompts so that they can participate in group discussion. These are all ways that you can combine function, form, and fluency. And the last part is your planning questions. These are questions that I'm going to show you how to apply to one example in social studies. What does it take to comprehend this text for an L? And what content-specific vocabulary must an L know? And what language knowledge must the Ls have? In other words, what background knowledge? And then lastly, sometimes you want to ask this, what else must they comprehend? So really, this is like a 3-step thing with another thought added on. Let's see how that works. After you answer reflection 2. What do you like about these language acquisitions that I just showed you? Is it A, they meet Ls where they are linguistically, or B, you can push or pull Ls up to the next language level, or C, the suggested linguistic expectations per level of mastery can help you out in planning, or D, something else? Okay, I see IDAC 4 says A. Yeah, I like that too. You meet them where they are. In fact, I like all of these. Yeah, Forrest says A also. Each one of these answers has a good point to them. So be sure to use them all. All right, let's go to 3. Teaching language demand, but not the grammar. It's difficult to remember that Ls can learn and respond at grade level, even though they're beginning, okay? So you need these planning questions and how-to examples to adapt to what you are teaching. Let's look at some examples. This is part of a longer, this is just the top part. It's a graphic organizer for teachers in order for you to think about creating language objectives. You start with the language that they need. So here, increased comprehension and some specific meaning at the beginning level. Let's start with that. And your lesson objective would be, students would be able to construct a timeline with drawings of the evolution of present-day snakes. Obviously a science lesson. Let's start with that. Snakes are believed to have evolved from reptiles with legs and to have been on Earth for 95 million years. So you ask yourself, what does it take to comprehend this sentence? For those of you who want to drop in a response in the chat, go ahead. What does an L need to comprehend this? And remember, they are at the beginning level. Anyone? All right, you give up? Visuals? Visuals is not here. So it's true that they need to comprehend it, but I'm talking about words. What words do they need to know the definitions of in this sentence in order for them? Yes, Juan Camilo, how are you doing? The verb evolve is a great one. They need to know evolve. Snakes and reptiles, excellent, you got it. Evolve, snakes, reptiles, they need to know Earth, they need to know the concept of 95 million. Right, that's right, okay, now you're thinking about it. That's great. So you would put that under the text here. I would go a step farther and say, you write evolve, and then the past tense form, and then the noun form, to show that these words are all related to one family, right? And then snakes, reptiles, Earth. And now you're looking at the language. What language knowledge must the reader have? The answer is right there. So like the passive voice, for example, are believed to have and to have been. They're all passive tenses. Subject in the second clause is implied, but it's not directly stated. Right, it's a compound sentence, but it's missing a subject. And this complex use of prepositions is always a stumper when you have students learning another language. I mean, prepositions really are like one of the hardest things to know in a language. You have to just memorize because they don't translate. Google Translate can't even keep up with the ways that certain prepositions, when used with different words, can't be directly translated. So you can take your pick. In just one sentence, you have these 3 challenges in grammar that need to be taught. But you know your students, you know your lesson, and you know the capacity of the way you're teaching. You can pick one of these and focus on that for the day. Put them under tasks. Let's see, I circled these and put passive voice because that's one of the hardest lessons to teach an L. And the reason why is because the passive voice happens at more of an advanced level if you look at the matrix of grammatical forms. If you have an early intermediate learner, the passive voice is going to be like, what's that, right? So you have to change this a little bit in order for them to get it. And let me show you how to do that. You look at the message demand, the passive voice, right? The sentence demand, they just have to understand that snakes evolve. So why not put it in terms that they can know as a beginner, snakes evolve. That's better than making it a passive voice. Take the most pressing language demand, in this case, the passive voice, and change it for the beginners. You can say snakes evolved because it's more appropriate to their level of understanding in language, but it's still within the content. So your language objectives could be by writing the years that represent evolutionary time. Okay, so your language target combined would be students will be able to construct the timeline, writing the years and showing the representation of how snakes evolved. You don't need this graphic organizer forever. You just have to get your mind around how to look at language and the demands in a class, and then pretty soon you won't need it. Now this is the other question that's kind of like you added on. What else must the reader comprehend? In the passive voice, you're always asking like, who believes this or who said that? It's not really implied. You can leave this as a discussion topic for your ELLs if you're at that point or even in a class. But that's very specific to teaching the passive voice. Okay, so let's reflect on this secret number 3. Which questions will you use to ascertain language demand? And then once you're done with that, how will you inform other teachers? These are the questions again. I have to go all the way back. I didn't make a copy of that slide. So these are the questions. What does it take to comprehend this sentence? What vocabulary must they know? What background knowledge must they know? And what else do they know? Okay, so think about that as I scroll to point number 4. And by the time I get there, we can move on. Yeah, 4 and 5 are relatively quick, so you have time. Great, so now, how do you combine the standard with the language target to get one learning target? What you need is your standard, obviously, and an active task verb. I'm going to share with you a grid that makes your life easier to do this, and the production focus. Okay, that means, are you going to have them say it or speak it? I mean, are you going to have them speak it or write it? All right, so these are some examples of language objectives. You can see the first one up there. I'm not where the circle is, but students will articulate main idea and details using target vocabulary. So you can see all of these describe in precise adjectives, revise with present conditional, report with the citation verbs like determined. All these follow a predictable pattern. You have active verb phrasing using the language target. You can use these from beginner to advanced. But you have to combine different things in order to get here. When I saw this chart, I was blown away because it combines the Bloom's taxonomy, but also the language demands. So for example, at the very top, you have knowledge, collect, define, describe, label, right? And then as you go down towards synthesis and evaluation, you get more complex. If you've ever been to my workshops, I always stress that we need to be more around the circle area of this diagram, because I find a lot of teachers stay within the knowledge comprehension application area when they create their language targets and their learning targets. I'm not sure exactly where that comes from, but it seems to be a habit. It's like you're not giving the L a chance, or the students a chance to show what they actually know or they can do. So a lot of teachers stay within the, okay, can you spit it back at me? You know, can you recall? No, it's more like, can you synthesize this information? Can you create something out of it? Can you evaluate? I get a lot of questions from teachers saying, well, we have a beginner L, but then how can you expect them to evaluate something? Well, one quick example is pictures. They can evaluate certain pictures, like what is scary in this picture, or what is happy in this picture, and put them in different categories, right? That's a way to evaluate. Or that's one way to evaluate them evaluating. Okay, so these are some examples of the reading standards. I'll show you more for speaking and writing at the end. But you can see that you're articulating the main idea using key vocabulary. But the thing is, you have to teach them this key vocabulary in order for them to be able to do this. That's what I mean by explicitly teaching them in your lesson. It's like, this is what main idea is. And I want you to be able to say that when we're discussing, but also write it when we have our exit ticket or our activity, right? So you can read all those examples and substitute whatever you're doing for the next activity that you have. So secret 4, how do you combine the content standards with language target? You've seen enough examples here. How are you going to do it? What does this mean to you? How are you going to combine your lesson targets with your language targets? Another 8 seconds. All right, the last one. Strategize adaptation of your teaching materials. you're going to use your knowledge to create your own strategies to adapt teaching materials for all learners. Not today, but when you apply this. Okay, I've given you a lot of information, a lot of tools to put together your language acquisition toolbox. Those of you who've taken my class before or workshop, I love the concept of like having a toolbox and using those tools to create instruction. So you have the RLab modality analysis. If you have an L person in your school, then you can ask that person to help you analyze. If you're the L person, then it'd be great for you to know how to analyze. The videos that I created, I think it's enough information for you to take in what it takes to make a proper analysis. Number two is the progression grids. There are many out there. Just select one that you like to use. They come in many forms, more complex and more like easier to understand. So pick one that you like and use that. Number three, use the planning questions and the teacher graphic organizer so that you can get familiar with how to go step by step in creating a language objective. And by all means, use the Bloom's taxonomy that was super hyped up by this Professor Latoni. Don't know who that person is, but really changed my way of looking at language objectives as they relate to content objectives. So that's pretty much the toolbox there. These are examples of writing standards with language objectives. The first circle there, using strong verbs. Well, you have to give the L's a bank of what you consider as strong verbs and make sure that they use them expressively in their speaking and also in their writing in one lesson. Of course, you can do the lesson again the next day, but at least in one day, you're having them at least hear it, read it, speak it, and write it. The other one there I have just randomly chosen, summarize nonfiction text using general present tense and citation verbs. You have to show them what present tense is by an example. So in your mini lesson, you can just point out, this is the present tense. And then as you go in the middle of your lesson, have them pair share with a friend, saying something in the present tense. And then at the end, you're giving them an exit ticket to write out the proper form of a verb that you've discussed in the present tense. All while they're summarizing the nonfiction text, right? So in terms of speaking, again, you have these goals here. Students will restate a partner's response using paraphrasing expressions. So you have to model these at the beginning of our lesson. You can say like, so what you're saying is the same thing as, if I understand you correctly, you know, and even if you have to translate this, or now that we're remote teaching, they can translate on Google real fast. So it's just a matter of practicing now. Then you can ask them to repeat that in a speaking activity and then write it as an exit ticket. And the last one, I just circled that randomly using complete sentence. So you have to show them what a complete sentence is, then have them use it while speaking, and then show them that they can produce a complete sentence. So the last thing before your overall impressions, how can you adapt your content materials? You have content materials already created at one point in your life in teaching. So how are you going to adapt that? Just pick one and maybe say, you know, you're going to analyze L, you're going to use a progression grid, you're going to use a graphic organizer, you'll use more challenging taxonomy words. Okay, another 6 seconds. So let's review the 5 secrets. Now it's out there. You analyze the modalities, you refer to the progression charts, teaching demands, combine everything into one learning target, and then strategize your adaptation. You must have seen this question before. Overall reflections, what would be interesting to you in the detailed steps, like a tutorial format for more asynchronous learning? You can type that in. Which topics would you like to learn about? And if you have any other questions, we have 11 minutes or so. You can drop it in the chat, or you can unmute, or you can write it in the form and I'll email you. So you can do that now. As you think about that, I just wanted to remind you of the form, and stay tuned for next week's second part of co-planning. So I'll show you how to use these language targets as you co-plan with your other teachers. If you're an ELL instructor, co-planning with like your math teacher or your science teacher, or if you're the co-teacher in charge of ELLs, it would be great to know how to co-plan. And then just a reminder to attend the NICE TESOL conference that's coming up in November. They always have a lot of good things. Any questions? It took me like a long time to know about language objectives. Maybe this isn't new to you. And maybe you got everything. So let me know if there's like a question too. Oh, I see one. Come on. Yes, I would be interested in tutorials. Oh, okay, great. You're welcome. Tutorials about asynchronous instruction. Oh, okay. So just in general, not a specific topic within asynchronous instruction. Forrest says, access to documents information. Yes, just fill out the form and send it in, and I'll send you the slide deck with the links to the Google file that has all this information in it. Yeah, the cutoff, the unofficial cutoff form is part of the package you'll get. It's in the folder, in the Google folder. You didn't receive the file. Okay, Janie, I'll make sure that. Which one was that? Which seminar was it? The last one. Okay, number 3. Okay, I'll send that out to you. Oh, I'll drop in the form. So Forrest, you must have come in a little late and didn't see the connection. Here's the form. Sorry about that. So fill out that form, and then once I get that, I'll send it out to you. Great. You're welcome. Any other lingering thoughts? I'm sure you're all excited to go back to school. Oh, you mentioned, Jenny said you mentioned that we would see the past one as well. I attended 3 and 4, but missed the first 2. Okay, if you miss the first 2, you'd have to look, okay, let me email you, because it's kind of complicated. It doesn't all come in one package, it's like per webinar, because people attend these ad hoc. It's like they come for 1 and 3, but not number 2, right? So let me email you directly. All right, if there's nothing else, then we can just close off. I know it's been a busy week for everyone. You're welcome. Thank you, Camilo. It's always a pleasure to see previous students. So thank you, everyone. Great, Olga, see you next week too. You're welcome, IDOC4. Jaejeong, thank you so much for coming. All right, have a safe day to you too, Forrest. Thank you. Thank you, Sabine. Thank you, Danette. See you.